Good morning. Welcome back to Planet Doug Behind the Scenes. It's about 7:30 in the morning and I'm sitting here on the bed in my room, my lovely single room at the Dean Hotel in Bukitingi, also known as the, what's it called? Oh yeah, Red Doors Sharia near Pasar Kuning, I think. Anyway, it's a Red Doors branded hotel, and it used to be called, I guess it's still called the Dean Hotel, but on Google Maps, if you look for it, it's called the Red Doors Sharia near this market. Pasar means market, so it's near Pasar or our Kuning or something like that. And I've been here for 2 nights, and the whole reason I came to this hotel was to use Wi-Fi, because where I have been staying up in the village, I don't have access to Wi-Fi, so I can't upload anything to YouTube, and had a bit of a backlog of videos, both Planet Doug videos and a bunch of behind the scenes videos, and I wanted to upload them, so I came here and checked into this. It's a low budget hotel, but they do offer Wi-Fi in the room, and I've been busy uploading things. And as I talked about in my behind the scenes video yesterday, things have not gone well. A variety of technological problems, a weak Wi-Fi signal, problems with my MacBook connecting to that signal. Mainly the problem is because my MacBook and the Wi-Fi signal were not getting along, I switched to using my smartphones, which for some reason have a much stronger Wi-Fi connection than my MacBook. So instead of uploading from the Mac, I copied the video files to my phones, and yeah, I have 2 of them. So I was uploading Planet Doug videos from this phone and behind the scenes videos from this phone, so I had them, both going at the same time. And that worked a lot better than the Mac and faster, but there's a major problem with uploading on a smartphone to YouTube. I don't know why it happens, but over and over again, I would be uploading for hours, and as soon as the video reached like above 90% uploaded, I got as close as 98%, and as soon as whenever all these video files reached that point, something went wrong, and then it would basically cancel the upload and restart it. So it wasn't really canceling the upload, it would just restart it all the way from 0. So, the very first night this happened, and I was so frustrated and stressed out and annoyed. And then I uploaded all throughout the night again, and I woke up with a video on this phone. When I woke up in the morning and I checked on it, it was at 98%, and it said it had 2 minutes left to finish uploading. And then I'm watching it to see it happen, and then it just, before it reached 100%, it reset and went all the way to 0%. So like essentially the 9 hours of uploading throughout the night was completely lost because it just went back to 0 and started all over again. So I abandoned that attempt completely, and I went back to the MacBook. And my theory, and I think my experience, is that as slow as it is from the MacBook and as difficult as it is to maintain a Wi-Fi connection, it doesn't reset. This resetting business, going back to 0% and starting all over again, that only happens, it's happened in the past as well, but it only seems to happen when I'm using a smartphone for uploading. On the MacBook, there are other problems, but at least it never resets. So if you get to 60% uploaded, you're going to stay at 60%. And I believe, I haven't done it this time. I'm going to have to do it this morning, as I'll explain in a minute. But I think you can even put your MacBook to sleep, like close the lid so it shuts down, and then open the lid hours later, and it will pick up uploading again from where it left off. You're not going to lose everything you've done already. At least that's my experience in the past. The problem with the MacBook is, as I said, it constantly disconnects from the Wi-Fi. So what I need to do to finish these uploads, I have to upload 24 hours a day, like all day long and all night long, which means you're basically babysitting the system. You can't really leave it. and you have to check on it every hour or every 2 hours. So even during the night, I'm a very light sleeper, so I wake up every hour or every 2 hours anyway. I don't sleep through the night. But it's now, every time I wake up during the night, it's generally every hour, hour and a half, 2 hours. When I find myself awake, I get out of bed, turn on the light, put on my reading glasses. I have to log in because the screen of the MacBook, I mean, the Mac hasn't gone to sleep, but the screen, I set it to shut down because I don't need the screen on while it's doing this. It can work without the screen being on. But then I have to enter my password, turn the screen back on, and I see that it has disconnected from the Wi-Fi. So I have to connect again to the Wi-Fi, go back to sleep. 2 hours later, I wake up, I do it again, it's disconnected again. But it stays connected for like an hour or so, and then it disconnects. So each 2 hour segment, I might get an hour's worth of uploading, and I do that throughout the entire day, throughout the entire night. I just keep reconnecting. And and then, yeah, this morning, or last night, I had 6 videos uploading. And I originally set them to upload in sequence so that one would be uploading, and when it reaches 100%, then it goes to the next one. And when that one reaches 100%, then it goes to the next one. And that worked for a little while, but then I noticed in the middle of the night that just stopped working. When it got to video 3, it just froze. And hour after hour went by, and it wasn't increasing. It was, the third video was at 77%, and it never, ever went to 78%, no matter how long I waited. So the whole system, even though I was connected to Wi-Fi, the whole system had frozen. So I figured out, I've never done this before, but I figured out that even though I was uploading 6 videos all at once, I could go through the whole list of 6 videos, and one by one, I can change it from a draft and then go through all the settings. And once I went through all the settings and saved the final result for the upload, then all of them were uploading simultaneously. So I could no longer do it one by one, but if I went through the whole list and completed the upload sequence for each one, now the remaining 4 videos, because 2 had completed, I had 4 left, the remaining 4 were all uploading at the same time. And that actually kick-started the process. So all 4 of them started uploading. And that's good and bad. I mean, it's good because they are actually uploading, but it's bad because the upload bandwidth is being divided over 4 videos. So even though I had this thing running all night long, most of yesterday and all last night, none of them have finished uploading yet. One is at 96%, one is at 44, one is at 31, and one is at 29%. So I've been monitoring it this morning since I woke up, but yeah, when I woke up this morning, it wasn't connected to Wi-Fi, so however many hours I was in bed sleeping, nothing was happening. And it was very, very difficult to connect to Wi-Fi. I kept getting kicked out, and I seem to have a very weak signal, so I don't know. I'm hoping one of them I'm hoping will reach 100%, so at least that one will be done, and I know I've made some progress. And what I'm going to do today is move to a new hotel. I thought I would just stay in this hotel and keep working until I'd uploaded all the videos, but this place is driving me crazy. The Wi-Fi isn't strong enough. So I'm moving today. I booked a room for one night at a different hotel, the Mandiri, where I stayed before. It's also a low-budget hotel, but I have a memory of staying there before and finding the Wi-Fi acceptable in the rooms. So I'm going to give that a try. I was hoping all of these would be uploaded by this morning. I've been uploading for so many hours. It should have been done, but they're not. So I booked a room for another night. So I'm going to spend another day and night here in Bukit Tinggi, all day, all night, uploading these remaining video files. So that is where Planet Doug is at right now, and at least I've made some progress. These are the behind the scenes videos that I'm uploading right now. I had 4 Planet Doug videos, and they have uploaded. Those are the main ones that I've been working on, and they did upload. And I've already posted one of them. I said it live, and that was the video about flying to Sumatra. So I finally posted the video about flying here, even though I've been here for, 10 days already. But yeah, it's just the way it goes when you're living in a village without access to Wi-Fi. The other news going on in Planet Doug, on Planet Doug, is the possibility of renting a scooter. And I decided to look into this for a variety of reasons, but mainly because of time. I just don't have enough time to cycle, basically. The whole idea of bike touring, you need lots of time. I definitely do. And then if you're also trying to go to a variety of places and upload and shoot and edit and upload YouTube videos, for me, it just can't be done. You know, like, and if Indonesia offered a longer tourist visa, I would still do it, but I only get 30 days at a time. And your 30 days just vanish like that. I mean, I talked about the math of this a little bit last time, where, you know, you think you have 30 days, and then you might do a little schedule. You know, day 1 I'll do this, day 2, and you think, oh, okay, I can do all these things within those 30 days. But suddenly, when you get here, you find that those days are disappearing, and you never get started doing what you came here to do, which is what happened in my case. So, for example, you know, you got 30 days, but day 1 is flying here, right? The day that you arrive and get your entry visa, you know, your 30-day tourist visa, that's day 1. It's already gone. Day 2 is kind of a recovery day because it was a long, difficult journey to get to the village, and then you basically have to settle in. There's people there that you know, you're talking with people, you're hanging out with people, you're exploring the village, you're just basically settling into your life there, unpacking and getting organized. Day 2 is gone. And then, of course, I had my SIM card problems because my smartphones had all been blocked by Indonesian customs. So day 3, I had to go into town and visit the Telkomsel office so that I could get my SIM card connected. That took an entire day. So 3 days out of 30, 10%, right? Yeah, 10% of your time is already gone. And of course, you're going to get to the end the day you fly out, or as in my case, take the ferry out. That's day 30, that's another day you lose. And then, of course, you have to go to the town where the ferry is. That's a day. And then you need a day of getting organized and packing. So that's another 3 days on the end. You lose 3 days at the beginning. You lose 3 days at the end. So you're already, you're shrunk down to 24 days. And then here I am trying to upload YouTube videos. And it's going to take me 3 days just to upload these videos. So it's another 3 days gone. So when are you going to ride your bike anywhere? Like, seriously, it's, anyway. So I was looking at my schedule, and then I sent a message to a friend of mine here and asked him, like, what do you think? Do you know anybody that would be willing to rent me a scooter? Let's see what's going on over here. Ho ho, ho ho ho. We're at 97%. So in all this time, we went from 96 to 97. And it was sitting at 96 for a long time, even before I started up the camera. So getting just 1% uploaded takes a long, long time. Slowly getting there. So today, as I said, I'm moving into a new hotel. I'm going to finish uploading, do a whole bunch more internet stuff while I have Wi-Fi. Then I'm going to spend the night in this new hotel, and then tomorrow morning, which is, Friday morning, go back to the village, and by then I'm hoping to have some more of the logistics worked out for this scooter rental. And then this weekend, I guess I'll start doing day trips. I have a whole bunch of places in my mind I want to go to. We'll see how it works out. There's a village near my village. My village is on a volcano called Mount Merapi. And on the other side of Mount Merapi, there is a village. It's a local tourist attraction everybody knows about, but there was some kind of international publication called like Budget Travel or something like that, and they listed the 5 most beautiful villages in the world. And this village was listed as one of the 5 most beautiful villages in the world. You know, whether that list carries any weight or not, who knows? But setting that aside, apparently it is a very beautiful village, and it's very historic. Traditional architecture, mosques, you know, the Rumah Gadang, very old, you know, everything dating from the 18th century, all the buildings. And the scenery is supposed to be spectacular. So that's the first place I'm going to go on my scooter. And it's only about, I don't know, 30 kilometers away. But even to get there by bicycle would be very challenging as a day trip, because it's all uphill. It's just like steep, steep, steep. You know, just getting from my village to a town called Padang Pajang is all uphill on a major road with brutal traffic. I guess that's another advantage, I think, about not cycling. The roads here are just too dangerous. They're too dangerous for cycling. They really are. It's very rare for me to say something like that. So if I'm saying that, you know it's pretty bad. I mean, statistically, the chances of getting hit, I think, are very high. They're just are. So it's not, I would still cycle. I would still do it myself, but I can see that switching over to a scooter is not a bad idea. It's not a bad idea. It's safer to ride a scooter. So so it's a very busy road to get to Pada. And then you go off onto a countryside road heading into the volcano, and it's up and down, up and down. And then to get to this village, you have to go straight up the volcano. So by the time I would get there on a bicycle, I'd be finished. I'd be exhausted. And then, you know, you can't really enjoy exploring the place. I mean, you could do it if you're traveling and then you spend the night in the village. That's how bike touring works. You make up for the physical effort of getting somewhere, because when you get there, you just spend the night there, and then you wake up the next morning, and then you go out exploring. And then the day after is when you bike away. But to go there on a day trip, and well, this village, I don't think there's any place to stay anyway. There might be some homestays, but according to what I've seen online, they're very, very expensive and difficult to organize. It's not like you can show up on the slopes of the volcano and expect to find hotels. You pretty much have to stay in the nearby town. So then you're doing a day trip, you know, riding your bicycle all the way up the volcano and then all the way back down again. So I'm thinking renting a scooter to go to this place makes a lot more sense. So that's what I'm hoping to do. And today I'm going to keep the ball rolling and try to get this organized. Scooter up to this village and then scooter back down again. And then scooter to Lake Maninjau, scooter back again. There's another beautiful area I want to visit. And then there's an area called the Harau Valley. So there I'd probably have to stay in a hotel, because I would ride my scooter to a city called Payakumbuh, where I've stayed before, and then base myself in Payakumbuh, and from there ride the scooter out into the Harau Valley, maybe 2 days, and then drive back to the village. And then by then I have to start thinking about my visa, because my visa is going to be expiring, and I have to go to Padang to go to the immigration office. There is an immigration office here in Bukit Tinggi, but I went there last time to get a visa extension, and I had a lot of trouble there. So this time I want to go to a different office. So I'm going to go to the immigration office in Padang, different city. So if I keep my scooter that long, then I can probably go on a ride down to the coast, some very interesting places I have my eyes on, and then ride along the coast to Padang, apply for my visa extension, base myself there. And anyway, I'm developing this whole new plan for scooter travel. And at the very least, no matter how it works out, I'll be able to visit the most beautiful village in the world, the Harau Valley, Lake Maninjau, another beautiful valley with a lookout point. At the very least, I'll be able to do those 4 things with this scooter. And then maybe even explore my own area, my own neighborhood a bit more with the scooter, because, you know, I had the experience the other day where I wanted to go to a lookout point, and getting up there with my bicycle it physically wasn't possible. I mean, the roads are so steep, you can't really get up there with a bicycle anyway, so what is the point? I ended up walking up there, you know, pushing my bicycle the whole way. So it's, that's just the way things are. 98%. So that is what is going on Planet Doug right now. Continuing on with Planet Doug behind the scenes, I just took a relatively long break because I wanted to make a cup of coffee, and I don't have my usual coffee mate, like coffee whitener powder that I like to use, coffee creamer basically, and I haven't been able to find any in this part of Bukittinggi. So I bought some packaged coffees, you know, that the one serving 3-in-1 kind of coffee envelope. So this is what I'm drinking right now. Good Day Cappuccino, it's called. And it's kind of a funny one. I remember the first time I saw this, I was confused because there was a small envelope on the back. So you got the big envelope and then the small one. And I wasn't sure what to do with that, but then I eventually figured out that just as on the picture on the front, you see it's got some granules on top of the coffee foam. So those are chocolate granules, and that's what's in this little envelope. So you pour the main contents in your coffee, stir it around, and then you open up this little package, and then you sprinkle your coffee, your chocolate on top, and that's what I've done. So it looks very nice. Once you do that, it really looks like you got this from a fancy coffee shop. And I don't know how they do it. I had a different type of a cappuccino mix yesterday, and it created a lot of foam, like a huge amount of foam on the top. And this one also makes foam on the top. I don't know how. I'm not like foaming it up or anything like that, but. And they taste fine. You know, I wouldn't even say really that it tastes like coffee. It tastes like sugar. It's almost all sugar. So I don't usually like to use these mixes, but yeah, if I want something hot in the morning, you know, this is what I ended up with right now. And it takes forever in this room for my kettle to come to a boil. I don't know, is it even possible for electricity to be weaker? Like you go from one hotel to another, it has the same voltage, it's the same electricity, right? I'm plugging it into the wall. But here, I don't know, it just takes forever for the water to come to a boil. Like the electricity in this hotel is weaker than in other places. Like in the village, the electricity there is really powerful. My kettle goes nuclear, but here it just takes forever. So I've been spending a long time waiting for the water to come to a boil, and my upload is still at 98%. And I watched an entire Itchy Boots video, like a 30-minute video, while I was waiting for my water to come to a boil. So it's been over 30 minutes since it got to 98%, and we still haven't clicked over to 99%. It's probably going to take all morning just to reach 100% on this upload. So yeah. Moving on to YouTube stories, the obvious one will be the latest YouTube video from Itchy Boots, which I just finished watching, and I found it fascinating. It was a really interesting video for me. Not so much because I guess I don't approach these travel videos the way they're intended. I mean, Itchy Boots makes this video as an entertainment for a general audience, but I look at it specifically as a travel experience. I'm not looking at it as an entertainment. I'm looking for information and details and logistics. And there's a lot in this video, kind of funny. She doesn't talk about logistics very much. Even her camera gear, you never see her using it. You never see her doing anything with it. You only see the results. So you see the video that the camera took, but you never really see the camera in action, if you know what I mean. But at one brief moment in this video, it's kind of funny. I've watched so many Itchy Boots videos, but I never ever see her holding a camera because she never goes by a mirror, never does anything like that. But in this case, she was in the cab of a pickup truck. Her motorcycle was in the back of the pickup truck, and then she was driving all the way to Abidjan, you know, the capital of the Ivory Coast, because her motorcycle is still broken down, and she's basically physically transporting her motorcycle all the way to the capital city to get it repaired. And she was sitting in the cab of the pickup truck, and I guess she had her camera, you know, she's taking video in, and at a brief moment, she kind of held the camera this way, and then there was the rear view mirror on the outside of the truck, you know, facing backwards. And for a brief second, I caught a glimpse of the GoPro in the mirror. And it's a very small image. You can't really make out any details, but it was just, for the first time ever, I've seen her holding a camera. And she had a little selfie stick. I don't know what kind of selfie stick. I don't know what she's using. And has a, you know, GoPro on a selfie stick inside a media mod. But then on the side of the camera, there was a little something sticking out. And I think it was some kind of an external microphone. But again, I have no idea what it could be. I don't know what kind of gear she uses. And on this particular video, she also had to put her motorcycle on a very small, rickety boat to get across a river. And at that time, she used video from her 360 camera, because on her handlebars, she mounts a GoPro Mini, which is aimed at her all the time. And then she also has a 360 camera. And she doesn't do any of the traditional 360 camera things with it. Like, she never raises it high in the air to get a fake drone shot. She doesn't really pan ever. It's not like she's filming the road ahead of her. And then with the 360 camera, of course, you can reframe afterwards to, you know, pan to the side and follow objects around. You can look up, you can look down, you know, you can aim the camera in any direction you want. She never does that as far as I can tell. But in this case, she did it a little bit because, you know, she turned the camera on while all these men, like 7 or 8 local men, were like picking up her bike and putting it on at the front of the boat. And she just had the camera running the whole time. And the advantage of that, of course, is that the camera's filming everything. And then she sort of panned the camera, looking at the men holding her motorcycle, then panned over to the boat. It was a very effective shot. Yeah, I like that a lot. So yeah, you got to see a little bit of the behind the scenes camera work from Itchy Boots, if you know what you're looking for. %. We reached 99%. Yes. And if I were uploading from my phone, I'd be very nervous about this time, because this is when it would reset to 0 and I'd lose all of this and start all over. But I have more confidence when you're uploading from a laptop. You don't lose the connection with YouTube. But on a digital device like this, you know, using a mobile, well, I don't know why it would be different. It's a Wi-Fi connection. This is also a Wi-Fi connection to the same Wi-Fi network. Why would it fail with the phone, but it wouldn't fail with the MacBook? I don't know. The MacBook is much slower and disconnects all the time, which the phone doesn't. The phone is much faster and it does not disconnect. It stays connected all the time. But the downside is it keeps resetting to 0. At least the MacBook doesn't reset to 0. At least that hasn't happened so far. So we're at 99%. We'll see whether it resets back to 0. I certainly hope not. Yeah, I had a lot of thoughts about this Itchy Boots video. Again, from the logistics point of view, she talked about some really interesting things. But, you know, the last few videos, of course, she's been going through major muddy roads, and a man helped her drive the motorcycle through the mud. But she's not blaming him, but I'm pretty sure that if Itchy Boots rode her motorcycle, she wouldn't have had the same problem. But the way the man drove or rode the motorcycle, he burned out the clutch. Like to get through the mud, you know, he had to really rev the engine. He was sort of feathering the clutch to, you know, send power to the rear wheel. But the way he was doing it, he basically just burned out the clutch. And that's why Itchy Boots can't ride the motorcycle anymore. And she was still, whatever, you know, 500 kilometers from Abidjan. So everybody was helping her. And they towed her motorcycle to the nearest town. She spent the night in a hotel there, or a guest house or something. She didn't show it, I don't think. She didn't show where she was staying. And then the next morning, another guy, she said it was the brother of the other guy, though I tend to doubt things like that because I've run into it in the past where everybody you meet, they say, oh, this is my brother, this is my sister. And you think they're family, but no, they just say brother for everybody. Like a friend is also brother, so they probably weren't related. But she said he was the brother of Lawrence, the guy who helped her the first time. So this guy, they tied a rope to her motorcycle and then they towed her about 140 kilometers to another town, or I forget the sequence now, but anyway, towed her 140 kilometers. And she also had to cross a river into the Ivory Coast. And there things got really sketchy. When she got, I felt so sorry for her because it would have driven me crazy to have a feeling of having no control over your life, because all these men were helping her, you know, towing her motorcycle, carrying her motorcycle, putting it in the back of pickup trucks, tying it down, putting it on boats, tying it down. And they basically take over the whole operation. And she would see things that she didn't like the way they were tying the rope. She thought, no, that's not safe. You have to do it this way. But it's very difficult for her to insert herself into the situation and get it done in a way that she thinks is better or safer for her and her motorcycle. And so it's very, very frustrating. I can understand that. And because of the language barrier, it's difficult to understand what anybody is saying. But it seemed like in the end, she kind of just said, you know, all right, you just go do it. Like she didn't have a choice in the matter. All these people were helping her, and she basically just had to let them do it the way they were going to do it. You know, she had no choice in the matter. But she got to the river, and at first I think she was pleased because there was a big pontoon boat there with a lineup of trucks. And she thought, so they have a big ferry going back and forth that can carry heavy vehicles, so she could put her motorcycle on that ferry. But they told her, no, it was broken. The ferry was broken down. So all those trucks were just waiting. And of course, in a normal African lifestyle for this part of Africa, that would be normal. And these truck drivers would just wait until, they don't have a choice. They just sit there and wait until the boat is fixed. And that could take days, it could take weeks, and you just don't know, and they just basically have no choice. So if Itchy Boots could find out, the boat will be running tomorrow, 3 days, we're going to get new parts, but there's no way she could rely on that, I guess. I'm wondering in her case what I would do if I had that motorcycle and I was in her situation. I guess to me it would have depended on my visa. If I had enough time on my visa, maybe I would just settle in and wait for a while, wait for a few days and see what happens. Maybe the big boat would start running. But she didn't, she basically said that's not an option for her. She couldn't stay there overnight. And understandable. Check my video, 99%. And she followed the local advice, the advice of the local people who said, okay, we have to put your motorcycle on this boat. And as she said later on, that was the sketchiest river crossing of all. And I was looking at that boat and thinking, this is definitely not a good idea. This boat, the chances of it tipping with her motorcycle on it were high, very high. And I think foreigners like us, I've had this experience many times, we tend to overestimate how safe something is. Like we underestimate the dangers. And there was a time, this is going here in Sumatra a long time ago, when I was on my bicycle and I was hanging out around Lake Toba. Lake Toba, and there's a tourist town in the middle of Lake Toba called Tuk Tuk, very famous place. Maybe I'll go there on this trip, who knows? If I'm not cycling anymore, then like I have more freedom of movement. But anyway, they have ferry boats that go back and forth from the shore to the Samosir Island, which is in the middle of the lake. And I was there one day when, this was so long ago now, I'm not sure I can remember the details, but it was a holiday period and the boats were heavily loaded. I mean, they overload the boats. Me standing there looking at the boat, I can say, no, that it's not safe to get on that boat. But when you're in those situations, I've been in this situation many times in the Philippines a lot, where you just end up going with the flow, where, I don't know, all the local people, they must know, they're all getting on the boat, they're just crowding on more and more and more people, more vehicle, more luggage, more people. They're all getting on, and they must have done this 100 times, so they know, right? It's their country, it's their boat. They know what's safe and what isn't, and then you just find yourself swept up in the moment, and you find yourself on this boat, and even though it's an incredibly unsafe boat, there you are, you're on the boat because you sort of trust the local people. Too dangerous, it's overloaded, I could see it. This boat is not designed for that much weight. And then a couple of weeks later, I don't remember the details of this story anymore. I don't remember the time frame, but I was still there. I was staying on Tuk Tuk, and a couple of weeks later, one of these boats went over, and pretty much everybody died. They all drowned because none of them really knew how to swim. And it's one of the more amazing stories that I've come across on the internet, because it was the exact same boat. I think it was the boat that I was looking at. Like, they have a few ferries that go back and forth. And I think the boat that tipped and sank was the one that I didn't get on that day. And what happened was they overloaded it, but then all these people went over to one side of the boat, so it was heavy on one side, and then it just flipped over. And I say it's an interesting story because some of the people survived. They must have survived. A few people survived. It's hard to get information, like the accurate details. And they shot video on their smartphones. And they shot video at the time when the boat had flipped over, and there were all these people in the water, and then there were people on the boat. Like, the boat was still floating, but the bottom of the boat was sticking out over the surface of the water, and people were in the water, and they're holding onto the boat, and they're trying to climb up onto the top. And eventually, of course, what happened is the boat completely sank, and then nearly all of those people that you saw in the video from their smartphones, they all drowned. So knowing the end of the story, you're watching this video on YouTube, and this person has their smartphone, and they're panning over the scene, and you see whatever 50 people clinging to this boat and in the water, and then they're moving back and forth. And while you're watching the video, you know that these are the final minutes of these people's lives, because this boat is then going to go down and they're all going to drown. And a few people, I guess, were picked up. They were better swimmers than the others, and some boats came in and picked up just a couple of survivors. But almost, just about everybody on that boat drowned. So I think as a foreigner, we tend to overestimate or underestimate the dangers, because these boats, they do go down. I mean, you see the stories all the time. I think just like 2 weeks ago, there was a story I saw on the internet. A ferry here in Indonesia went down and a bunch of people drowned. So, you can't just assume the boat is safe. They do sink. They do flip over, and it happens. So in the case of Itchy Boots getting on this boat, I honestly thought it was a bad idea. I was watching the video and I thought, no. I mean, she took a lot of risks with these boats, putting her motorcycle on these boats, and each one I kind of looked at it and went, okay, I think you can get away with this one. But for some reason, this boat, when I was looking at it, and the attitude of the men, the number of people waiting to get on the boat, the sort of chaotic environment, I was looking at that and thinking, no, this is no way. I wouldn't do it. Your motorcycle is gone. And when I was watching her getting on this boat with her motorcycle, again, I was thinking, at the very least, in her situation, I would have done the trip in 2 stages, because she left all of her bags on the motorcycle, right? Everything. She had like some stuff. She probably has her passport in a money belt or something. She's not going to leave her passport on the motorcycle, but all of her luggage was still on the motorbike. So if the boat flipped and her motorbike sank into the river, she would have lost everything, not just her motorcycle, but all of her gear. So I was thinking, well, at the very least, remove your luggage from the motorcycle, separate. So that, I don't know, maybe the boat tips a little bit and your motorcycle goes over the edge and sinks, but at least you've still got your luggage. You've got all your stuff. She's probably got tons of, video footage on portable hard drives, her laptop, drones, camera gear, it's all in those bags. So, okay, she lost her motorcycle, but at least she still got all of her stuff. Even better than that, I would have taken 2 trips across. Like put the motorcycle on, the guys who were helping her were taking care of that, and then send the motorcycle across, and then she would go across on the next boat herself with her luggage. That would have been, I think, the far wiser thing to do. And had she been thinking clearly, and I think if she thought she had control of the situation, she probably would have done that. But you kind of get swept up in the atmosphere, and you just go along with whatever's happening. And I think it was the most dangerous thing she's done on her trip so far. And I don't think I would have done it in her case. At the very least, as I said, I would have taken the luggage off and taken that across separately, just in case. Because I thought the chances were very, very high her motorcycle was going to go into the river. But she made it across. She must have been panic-stricken the whole time. And the really funny thing, she got to the other end. And I also wondered about this, because there was a moment on the boat when a guy turned to her. She has it on video, I think it's on the 360 camera, where this guy turns to her and kind of laughing, says, "Why are you so frightened? Like, why are you so afraid? And, can't you swim?" And then Itchy Boots says, "Well, yeah, I can swim, but my motorcycle can't." And that was a big joke, and everybody was laughing on the boat. But I started thinking about that. Okay, she can swim. She's from the Netherlands. She's probably a very good swimmer. But she was wearing all of her riding gear. It's like a suit of armor that she's wearing, including riding boots. I think if the boat had tipped, she would have drowned, because I don't think you can swim with that much gear on. It would have been too heavy. She would have sunk as well. So, yeah, I don't know, that boat seemed really sketchy to me. And it probably would have been wise to take the time to get out of her gear, out of her boots in particular. And then if the boat did tip, she could swim to shore. But I think in all her riding gear, I don't think she would have made it to shore. I really don't. I don't think you can swim with that much gear on. She just would have sunk to the bottom. And of course, obviously, there's no life jackets. I mean, we're not talking about it's not a transportation system, and there were no life jackets for anybody. There's nothing like that. So I think she would have went straight to the bottom along with her motorcycle. But they made it across, and then I thought of this because when she got to the other side, she was still wearing her riding boots, but of course, you have to wade through the water to get to shore, and she would end up with soaking wet feet. Everything would get wet. And one of the guys gave her a piggyback ride all the way to shore. And that was a big funny moment. And, at first, of course, she was like, no, I don't want to do that. But they all insisted. And then she ended up climbing on top of this guy's back, and he carried her to shore so she could keep her feet dry. And of course, that was a very funny moment for everybody on the boat as well. 100%. So that video has been uploaded and saved. I have 3 more left. 49%, 34%, 32%. They're not going to upload while I'm here, of course. I'm only going to be here in this room for another couple of hours. And then I have to pack up, and I'm going to ride my bike to another hotel, and then I'll restart the uploading, connect it to their Wi-Fi, and hopefully I don't lose everything that's happened here. But even if I do lose, I think those 3 videos will upload during the night when I'm at the new hotel. So I think I'm okay. Just to finish the story of Itchy Boots, she got to the other side of the river, and then they put her motorcycle in the back of a pickup truck and drove her to a town where she could stay in a hotel. And then the same guys came back the next morning with the same pickup truck, loaded the motorcycle in the back, and then they drove the remaining, I think, 400 plus kilometers to Abidjan. And then she talked about something that I've been waiting to hear, because ever since she entered Guinea, I was expecting her to encounter a lot of corruption. Because when I was in Guinea riding my bicycle there was corruption everywhere. It was a daily thing to run into police or military or government officials, somebody trying to get money out of you. And if you're riding along the road, you run across checkpoints, checkpoint after checkpoint after checkpoint, with soldiers, with police, with government officials, and at every single one they will try to extort money from you. That was my experience in Guinea, and she sailed through Guinea and it never happened even once. She went through all these checkpoints and nobody hassled her, nobody tried to get money out of her, and I thought, oh, maybe things have changed. But in this case, when she got to Abidjan, I guess she was so tired, she didn't say anything when she arrived, but she spent the night at a hotel there. Again, we didn't see the hotel, we didn't see her arrival, we didn't see unloading the bike. We didn't even see any of the things that happened on that ride that she talks about. But the next morning, she does a little bit of a behind-the-scenes video clip where she tells the story, and she says that they went through 10 checkpoints on the way to Abidjan, and at all these checkpoints, they were getting money out of her. And I thought, okay, now this is the West Africa that I know. And she told one story in particular that was so amusing to me. She said this was the worst instance. You know, she was zooming along inside the cab of this pickup truck, and there were 2, I think they were motorcycle policemen at the side of the road, and they spotted her, you know, blonde hair, white woman from the Netherlands. You know, they was like, oh, foreigner. And she could see in their eyes, like, let's get some money out of this woman. And they started up their motorbikes, chased after them, pulled them over. And of course, they went through the whole routine of, well, okay, we need to see your license and your registration papers and your customs papers and your tax forms, you know, everything for the motorcycle. And of course, these guys have no clue what is a real paper or not, like what the legal situation is for riding a motorcycle through their country. When I was in Guinea, they constantly asked for my import papers for my bicycle. And of course, there is no such thing. They would ask, oh, where are your customs papers? Where are your import papers for your bicycle? You know, and there is no such rule. But they would ask for it anyway. And then when I said, you know, there are no papers like that, I don't have these papers, then they would say, oh, that's bad, 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 you know, we have to arrest you, we have to take you to jail, you know, you have to pay a big fine. And then you end up with this big negotiation, you come down, down, down. Then you basically come up with this idea, well, is there a fine I can pay on the spot? Like, and then, okay, you know, for $5, you know, you pay us and we'll let you go. And I almost never did in Guinea. I could outweight them every time this happened to me. I refused to pay. I would come up to a checkpoint, the man would demand to see my bicycle permit, and I would say there is no such permit and I don't have it, and then he would say, well, we can't let you through. And then what I would do is just roll my bicycle to the side of the road. I would find a little tree with some shade, and then I would wait And then the guy would come over from time to time and say, oh, you better pay the fine, or we're going to arrest you and take you to jail. And then I would say to them, this was all happening in French, and I would say, okay, no problem, let's go to jail. You know, I was thinking, well, if you want to put me and my bicycle in the back of your truck and let's drive to the next town, saves me some cycling, let's go. So I'm like, yeah, okay, arrest me, let's go. And I basically refused to pay. I would never pay these fines. And then eventually they would just get fed up with me, and the guy would come over very angry. He's, go. And they'd lift the barrier and just tell me to go. And then I would go, and I would go through this over and over and over again at all these checkpoints. But there were a couple of times when there was one area I had no choice because of there was this military problems going on. There was some like a civil war, some guerrilla group activity, and nobody was allowed to go down those roads. So they wouldn't let me ride my bike there, and I had to put my bicycle into a vehicle. You know, they pile it up on the roof or whatever, and I had to get in with all these other local people to drive that section of road. And then we got stopped by the police, and the police demanded money from me, and I would refuse to pay again. But now they were holding the entire vehicle hostage. They wouldn't let the vehicle go. So now, because I'm refusing to pay, all these other people were being inconvenienced. They had all paid already because they knew they had to. And then they got to me, and I just refused to pay. And then, of course, all the other passengers ganged up on me. And it's like, dude, come on. You know, we've been sitting here, we've been waiting, let's go. So eventually I had to pay in those situations, and I paid, and then we were allowed to go. And the other times this happened, I was in a vehicle with employees of NGOs. And I'll tell that story in a minute when I finish Itchy Boots' story. Because in this case, Itchy Boots was pulled over, the motorcycle cops were asking for her documents, her papers, and she didn't have them. Well, she did have them because she had all the proper paperwork, and she's giving these guys all of her papers and her documents and her passport and everything. And then the police just took them, just kept them, and said, oh, you know, this is the wrong paper, or the date is wrong, or you didn't get the right stamp, or you have to get a signature, and you didn't go to the right office, and then basically rode away and said, oh, you have to come with us. And they went through this long song and dance, like, oh, you have to pay for this. Oh, now you have to pay for this. Now am I free to go? No, because you also have to pay for this. And she ended up paying $50 total, like 50 US dollars in chunks. I think she had to pay 4 different bribes to the same cops for different infractions. They kept inventing new infractions, and they got very angry and were shouting at her. And the whole thing was basically a big act that they were putting on to get her to pay the bribe. And she paid, I guess she paid 4 separate bribes for a total of $50. And she said at other checkpoints, they were clearly just making things up. And she mentioned one thing in particular, that they were looking around the truck, and they says, oh, this is very bad, very bad. You're supposed to have 2 fire extinguishers in your truck. And because you don't have fire extinguishers, you have to pay a fine. And so they had to pay a fine because they didn't have fire extinguishers in the truck. And that's exactly what happened to me in Guinea when I was in the truck that belonged to the NGOs. You know, these were foreigners, and they're working for NGOs. They're working with these big refugee camps in Guinea, refugees from Liberia and Sierra Leone. And these NGO guys were telling me so many stories about all these checkpoints, and we went through these checkpoints. And what the cops have, and I saw this myself because they did it to me, they have a pad of paper. It's completely blank, other than a couple of lines and a date thing. And I guess it is official police papers, but there's nothing written on them, and they can basically write down anything they want. So they pull you over in a truck, you know, at the checkpoint, and then they come up to your truck and they look around and they say, oh, here's a problem, and they make up a law that you broke, and then they write down how much you have to pay, and they give you the paper, and you have to pay them the fine, and then you go to the next checkpoint and they do it all over again. And we would go to one checkpoint, and then because we didn't have fire extinguishers, we had to pay a fine. And the NGO guys were telling me, yeah, this is a normal one, that if you drive up to one of these checkpoints, the first time it happened to them, the police came and said, oh, you don't have fire extinguishers. That's very, very bad. And they wrote out a ticket, and then they had to pay the fine for not having fire extinguishers. And then when they got back to their home, they were staying in, the capital city, Conakry, they bought fire extinguishers and put them in the truck because they were told they had to have them. So the next day, or whenever it was, they go riding back out to the refugee camps. They go through the police checkpoints. The police come up to the vehicle. They see the fire extinguishers. Oh, those are dangerous. They can explode. You can't have fire extinguishers in a moving vehicle. They're too dangerous. And wrote them a fine. It wrote them a ticket because they had fire extinguishers and they had to pay a bribe. So the police would just make up anything they could make up. They tell you one day, oh, you broke the law because you don't have fire extinguishers. You put them in. The next day you broke the law because you do have fire extinguishers. And that's just the way it works. And I was expecting Itchy Boots to encounter this, and she never did until Ivory Coast. And then in Ivory Coast, she said, yeah, 10 different checkpoints. All these police trying to get bribes, trying to invent fines, tickets, infractions. And I found that to be a very, very interesting part of her story. I'm glad she did a little bit of this behind the scenes, but I really wish she had video of these cops doing this. She could have fired up her 360 camera and recorded these interactions on video, but yeah, she didn't have any video of that. She could only tell the story afterwards. Kind of interesting though. Well, video upload check. One of them is at 50%. So I think it went from 49 to 50%. So at least it's not frozen anyway. And yeah, I'll just let that keep going. And when it's not going to complete, but I'll complete the uploading when I get to the other hotel. I suppose I could stay here for another night instead of going to this other hotel. Yeah, I'll think about that. I might end up doing that instead of going through the hassle of moving to a new hotel. This is eventually going to finish today, no matter what. So maybe I'll just stay here tonight. We'll see. I'll decide in a minute. Well, that was a pretty long story about Itchy Boots, so I wasn't going to tell my next story, but maybe I'll do it anyway. We'll see if I can do it quickly. I wanted to do a podcast update because yesterday and today I listened to a very interesting podcast from 99% Invisible, one of my favorite ones. They started off, 99% Invisible was very much a design podcast. He's very interested in design, and he would come at it from very different angles. And they've sort of branched out a little bit into technology and culture and history and art and all these different things, trying to keep a design perspective. So this story, I'm not sure if it's design. I guess it is in a way, but it's more about technology. And it's a brand new podcast from them. It was just released in episode 546, and it's called The Country of the Blind. And that's also the name of a book by Andrew Leland. And so Andrew Leland is a reporter and a journalist, but he's also been slowly going blind. In university, he was diagnosed with a degenerative disease affecting his eyes that can't be cured and can't be fixed. And they were told that over a number of years, they weren't sure how long you are eventually going to go blind. And the way it works for him is that he's losing peripheral vision gradually. And at the point where he's telling this story in the podcast, he's down to just pinpoint. You can sort of see two little holes directly ahead of him. He's lost all the side vision, almost like he's looking through a straw, like a milkshake straw. And he can just see a tiny, tiny bit. And he's eventually going to go completely blind. So, of course, he's become very interested in the world of the blind. And he grew up fascinated with publishing, text, books, publishing houses, things like that, reading basically. And he had a job at a publishing company called McSweeney's. So he had this lifelong interest in the act of reading and book publishing, but now he's not going to be able to read anymore. So he got very interested in how do the blind cope with this throughout history, learning how to read. Of course, there's the modern system of Braille. And he ended up writing a book. The book is called The Country of the Blind. And of course, that is based on an H.G. Wells short story. Wells wrote a story called The Country of the Blind, and it's the story of a mountain climber in Ecuador in the Andes Mountains, and he fell off a mountain and he landed in this valley. And in the valley was a complete society cut off from the outside world for centuries, and everybody in the village is completely blind. And there have been so many generations of blind people that they don't even know what vision is. It's never existed for them. So as far as they're concerned, living in darkness without vision, without sight, is normal. And an entire society has developed. And I found this interesting, of course, because I recently watched the TV show See with Jason Momoa. And it's basically the same idea, where post-apocalyptic Earth, humans have lost the ability to see. And a whole world has developed where, you know, entire societies are functioning where nobody can see. You know, everybody is blind. So I talked about that in a previous behind-the-scenes video. And so, yeah, this podcast is quite interesting. I learned a lot of things that I didn't know. He goes through the history of reading for the blind. And the basic idea, it all started in France. So for a long time, of course, it was just assumed that the blind could never read. Of course, they can't see. How can they read? Therefore, they can't be educated. Therefore, they kind of lived a life of poverty, or their family took care of them. The blind couldn't really function in society because they couldn't read and they couldn't get an education, and it was just assumed, I guess, that they couldn't learn to do things. But then in France, there was a man, I think his last name was Huy, something like that, Huy. What is his full name? Valentin Huy. He was born into a family of weavers, and he was a skilled linguist. And in 1771, he saw some blind people kind of being mocked at some kind of a celebration or a circus. All these blind people have been dressed up in costumes, holding books with huge glasses on their face. They clearly couldn't read, and people were ridiculing them. And he decided to found a society called the Royal Institute to help the blind. And he was also working as a translator for the King of France. So he was getting these official documents delivered from the king, and it was coming, these documents were in, like, had envelopes and other documents. The lettering was very fancy. It was royal lettering, so it was embossed. The lettering was raised. You know, it was bumpy. So it wasn't just ink on a page, it was actually sticking out from the page. And then one of his students was sort of picked up these documents, was running their fingers like, oh, I can feel the letters. And then the light bulb went off. Ah, this is how the blind can learn how to read. We just have to make a printing press, make books with embossed lettering. So their idea was to use normal writing, like the same lettering that they use for books all the time, but instead of being flat, the printed page would be embossed, and then the blind could run their fingers over the page and they could feel the letters, and therefore they could read that way. And this was the first writing and reading system for the blind. Unfortunately, this wasn't really that efficient because these books were incredibly expensive to make, so nobody could afford them, and I guess they had to be really, really big. And it just was not a system that could be adopted throughout society. It was kind of a specialty thing that was only happening at these, foundations and institutes for the blind. But then in 1821, a soldier, a captain from Napoleon's army, came to Hui's school. And this captain in the army had developed his own system of communicating in the dark. Two reasons. One is, he's in the army, he's fighting, he's in Napoleon's army fighting the British and other armies, I'm sure. And then if within the army you write down a message and send it to another soldier, in the dark they can't read it. So the soldier has to light a candle, in order to read the message, and then the enemy can see the candle and shoot them, or whatever it is they did back in those days. So it was very dangerous to read at night. Plus, if the message is intercepted by the enemy, they can just read the message and get information. So he developed this system very similar to modern day Braille, where every letter he just poked a hole in a piece of paper. It was like a secret code. And then when you poke a hole in the paper from one side, there's a little bit of a bump on the other side that you can feel. So instead of writing the message, he would poke holes in the paper, a sequence. He used a sequence of 16, like a grid of 16 dots, and then a certain number of dots representing each letter. And that's the code he invented. And it turns out that people in the army were not that interested in his system. He thought he invented something pretty amazing, but nobody really in the army wanted to develop it and make a big deal out of it. So he went to this Institute for the Blind and told them about it. He says, hey, I've got this really cool thing where the blind can read. And he demonstrated it to the school. And there happened to be a 12-year-old student at the school named Louis Braille. That was this student's name, Louis Braille. And Louis Braille was a little bit of a, precocious kid, looked into this captain's system, took it home, and decided to improve on it. So instead of having a grid of 16 dots, Louis Braille, this 12-year-old, over a period of time, I don't know how long this took, worked on it and developed a system that was based on 6 holes, like 2, 2, 2, a grid of 6 dots, and then each letter of the English alphabet and each number was represented by a sequence of dots. So I've got it up here on the screen. The letter A is just 1 dot, top left corner. The letter B is 2 dots, top left, and then the one just below it. The letter C is 3 dots, the 2 at the top, and then 1 down on the right side. The letter E is 2 dots on a diagonal. So I'm assuming there's logic here, where the vowels, I can see A and E and I, and they are all represented with only 2 dots. So very, very simple, easy to read the vowels. The letter O is 3 dots, but spaced far apart. So I think the letter O would be really easy to recognize. And the letter U is also 3 dots spaced out. So I think the vowels have been designed, and then the most common letters like B and C. And so just like a typewriter, how they developed a typewriter, that the most common letters you use are in the right places to make it more efficient to type. At least that was the idea. So Louis Braille did the same thing with Braille. And then you get letters like Q or Y or Z, less common letters. Like the letter Q uses 5 dots, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Only the lower right one is not used. So the letter Y uses 5 dots as well. So the less common letters are more complex and use more dots. It would be more difficult to see them, but the more common letters are very simple and easy to read. So Louis Braille improved on this system from the captain, and that evolved into Braille, which is still used today. Yeah, really kind of fascinating. But another fascinating part of this story is that even though this system is far superior to raised, like embossed letters, it took a long time for Braille to become adopted because sighted people, like people who can see, when we look at Braille, it looks complicated, it looks difficult. So instinctively we think, well, we know about English letters, so why not just make the letters embossed, make them raised? Obviously that's easier. You can just go, oh, letter A, letter B, letter C, and then you can just feel the letters. Plus, if you use raised letters, it means the blind and the sighted were both using the same system. So if you have a book for the blind using raised lettering, then the blind can read it, but I can read it too because it's using normal letters, right? So for those two reasons, that like all the people that were in charge of the institutes for the blind, all the publishers, all the people who were making the decisions, the people with the money and the power, they were all sighted. They could all see, and they couldn't understand why Braille was better. All the blind students in these schools, they loved Braille. Like they instantly, it takes time to learn it. I mean, but it's like anything, it takes time to learn it, but they discovered that once they knew how to do Braille, it was just far, far easier, faster. Everything about it was better than raised lettering. But nobody was listening to the blind because they weren't in charge of the institutes. And then an American came onto the scene. This was a really fascinating part of the story. His name, Samuel Gridley Howe. He was kind of the American version of this French guy, Huy, where, you know, he's an American. I'll call him Howe. That's his last name. And Howe was living in the United States, and he had also wanted to help the blind. So his heart was in the right place, and he developed his own institutions and foundations to help the blind. And he went to France to see their raised lettering system, and he decided to improve on it because in Europe, in France, they were using very fancy lettering, like with a lot, like calligraphy almost. So even though the letters were raised and you could feel them, they were still difficult to read by touch because they were very elaborate. Like the letter A would have a big curly Q, like a capital letter, had all kinds of fancy additions. And Howe came up with this idea, well, why don't we simplify that? And instead of having a fancy letter A, let's just make it angular, with sharp points. Just make it A. Like no fancy curls or anything, just make it a very simple geometric shape, and let's make it pointed on the ends with sharp edges so it's easier to feel. And like the letter O, instead of being circular, he turned it into a diamond shape. And in Howe's opinion, this was a big improvement over the French system, and it, you know, probably was. So it was his idea, and he brought, and it was ended up being called the Boston line type, because I assume because it was based on just simple lines rather than fancy curves. It was just like Boston line type. That was the name of this system. He brought it back to the United States, and that was essentially the system that everybody used. All the schools for the blind, the publishers, they used Boston line type, and he was promoting it. And in fact, one of his students was both blind and deaf. What is her name? I think I can find her name pretty quickly. Very famous person, as it turns out. Laura Bridgman. And she became the first, you know, truly educated blind and deaf person. And then she kind of teamed up with Howe. She was his prize exhibit. So in order for him to promote his system, he would go, you know, making presentations everywhere. And then this woman, Laura Bridgman, who actually predates Helen Keller, she would go with him, and then she would demonstrate reading, you know, even though she was blind and deaf, and demonstrate that she was highly educated. And then Howe could say, and it's all because of books written in Boston line type. And for a long time, for about 100 years, even though most of the people who were blind preferred Braille, knew it was better. They tells this story in the podcast that students in class were learning Boston line type, but they were passing notes in class using Braille. Like when they were communicating with each other, they were using Braille because it was easier, and they had a little machine where you could print it yourself, like a little, I think like slate and tablet or something, this little thing you could keep in your pocket, and they could use it to write with Braille and pass notes in class, you know, like love letters and things like that in class. So all the blind students were using Braille even while they were learning Boston line type in school. So that was kind of interesting. This whole idea that even though Braille was far superior and all the blind people knew it was superior, the world at large still adopted raised lettering because the sighted people were in charge of what was popular. But then eventually came a time, I think in New York, there was another big, the New York Foundation for the Blind. And at that time, I think there were many writing systems had been developed. Braille was just one of many systems. Like every single person out there who decided they wanted to help the blind came up with a brand new system. So there was all these writing systems, and the New York Foundation for the Blind had to decide which one to adopt. And they had this big conference, this big meeting, where all the various foundations, all the schools, they all sent representatives. And I guess over a period of several days, they had this big knockdown, drag out debate. And they said, well, we have to adopt one. So let's all get together, have a big conference, let's talk about it, let's debate it, and let's vote and pick one. And in the end, Braille won, and then Braille became the official system, and now it's, you know, the one that everyone uses today. So yeah, that's the story of this podcast, basically. A couple other little things I found really interesting. One is that this guy, Leland, who wrote the book and who did the reporting for the podcast, he talks about becoming blind and losing his sense of sight. And one thing he noticed is that when he became obviously blind, you know, he started to use a cane to, you know, to feel his way, and then people around him could see that he was blind. Of course, all these people started trying to help him. You know, he's out in public trying to do something, trying to find something, and all these good-natured, well-intentioned people would come up to him and try to tell him stuff and help him and guide him, and this just annoyed him. He just wanted to be left alone. And it's kind of weird the way he described it. It was sort of like, oh, these people are just so annoying, you know, like, I wish they would just stop. Kind of portrayed it as a bad characteristic of people. And yet, from my point of view and from everybody else's point of view, it's like, well, we're just trying to help. So it's kind of weird that this instinct to help ends up being perceived as an intrusion. And in particular, the sense of touch, because people want to guide the blind. So they'll grab, you know, the blind by the elbow and try to guide them somewhere. And then a lot of the blind, you know, him and people that he spoke to found this very bothersome and intrusive. You know, it's an invasion of their privacy. Nobody wants to be touched. But then COVID came along, and suddenly we had social distancing, and the blind found this to be a big relief because people stopped touching them all the time. You know, people just didn't do that anymore. And it's like, thank goodness. I can go out in public without people constantly grabbing my elbow and trying to guide me places. Plus, they talked about the Me Too movement, where there was all this focused language was developed around consent, like physical touching required consent, right? So this was in the media, everybody's talking about it, there are court cases. And now there's this woman in particular who's telling this story. She said when she was out in public and someone would come up and grab her by the elbow to guide her, she would say, "You don't have my consent to touch me." And then of course, the person hears that language and they're like, whoa, you know, they're like, they back off right away. Because in the old days, she would say, you know, please, please, no, it's not necessary. Don't do this. You don't. She would try to politely tell them, you know, don't do this. Like, don't grab me, don't touch me. I'm okay. I can do this by myself. But the sighted person would think they are just being polite, that they really, and that the sighted person is, no, no, it's okay. It's okay. I really want to help you. I want to help you. So it was really hard to stop people from doing this, from grabbing them and guiding them places. But now, because of the Me Too movement, this woman would say, as soon as someone touches her, she would say, "You don't have my consent to touch me." And that was a much more powerful sentence than, you know, "Oh, it's okay, don't, you know, you don't have my consent." And a person is like, "Whoa, sorry," and they just back away. So that's kind of an interesting angle on all this. And perhaps one last thought that has stuck with me from this podcast, and it might be the most interesting thing that came out of this, out of listening to it, is this whole idea of where language lives. Like, where is language? You know, they had this idea historically that, of course, you have to read in order to get knowledge. Words exist there, and it's like language exists in your eyes. But now you have people who can't see, but they can read with their fingers. So now language is perceived in their fingers. So it begs the question, it raises the question, well, where is language really? And obviously language is actually in the brain. You've got your fingers can convey language to your brain, your eyes can convey language to your brain, and your ears can do it as well. And of course, that makes perfect sense. I mean, the brain is the home of language, and you can just think about different languages around the world. You know, there is the concept of the cow, you know, the animal, the cow. In English, we call it cow, and that's the language in our head. But the concept is there, but in French, of course, I believe it's vache. That's cow. You know, cow, vache. Every language has a different word for cow. But the basic concept of the cow doesn't change. You know, it sort of lives in your brain, but it's the you know, collection of letters representing that concept is what changes. And you can also think of that in the same way as the method of communicating that information to your brain. So language is in your brain, not in your eyes, if that makes any sense. And there's a device here that demonstrates that in a very interesting way. I'd never heard of this before. It's called an optophone, And just how Braille represented each letter with a series of raised dots. You know, each letter, you just touch it, you can feel each letter because of the number and pattern of dots. But the optophone is based on the idea that each letter could be represented by a sound. So a collection of frequencies and tones rather than a collection of dots. So rather than physically feeling each letter, you hear each letter. And when you think about it, it seems crazy, but then when you think about it more, yeah, it makes perfect sense. You know, if two dots here is the letter A, and then two dots here is the letter B, well, why can't the letter A be ha? And the letter A, or did I say A? The letter A could be ha, and the letter B could be you know, ha, That's AB, all right? Why not? So if you close your eyes and you can't read because you're blind, someone could play these tones, and then each tone is a letter, and then you can assemble the word in your brain. And they made this thing called an optophone, which is a combination tone generator and scanner. So you take a written page from a book, any book, and you put it on the scanner, and the scanner will scan it, see all the letters, and then it will play a series of musical notes, each note or each combination of pitches representing each letter, and then you just sort of sit there and you listen to it, playing this music, and yet your brain takes the music and is converting it into cow, book, desk, coffee, I want. It creates words. You're hearing sound, that's the input, but your brain is processing that sound and turning it into language, into words. Which is really kind of interesting. I never really thought about that. I mean, the optophone didn't really take off because I guess Braille is very efficient and is much faster. But the whole idea of converting sound into language is also quite an interesting one. And I hadn't come across that before. I guess it takes a lot of skill to learn how to do that. And then it's also slower. It's much slower than Braille. So it never really took off as a technology. And reading and listening to this podcast does make me think about modern technology because I don't really know much about it. I know that with computers and now with AI, with so many technologies, I'm wondering what that means for Braille. Because even for sighted people, we don't read books anymore. I don't. I haven't read a paper book for as long as I can remember. The books I've read have all been e-books. They're digital on a screen, right? And with computers, it's so much easier to convert text to speech, right? It's just like click of a button, and it's not like old, annoying robotic voices. Text to speech is so advanced now that you can even choose what accent you want. The voice you hear can have a British accent or Australian accent, American, Canadian, Chinese, Spanish, any accent you want in any language you want. So that technology has advanced to such a stage, audio books, that I do wonder what effect it is having on Braille in particular and all these things, that I've been talking about. I don't really know what advances have been made. They did have a very interesting sequence in here that I quite enjoyed where decades ago, they did have this idea of making audio books for the blind, like a long time ago. And this happened when talkies came out, like the very first movies that had sound. So you've got, like Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, the movie, with people speaking. And what they did was take that movie and put it onto a phonograph, like put it onto a record. And what they did was whatever was happening in the movie visually, they had a narrator describing. So they had all the audio from the movie, all the music and the people speaking, all the dialogue, but then they added more music, more sound effects, and a narrator describing what the characters in the movie are doing. And they thought this would be the most amazing thing for blind people. They can't go to the movie theater and watch the movie like we can, but now they can buy the record, play the record, and they can listen to the whole movie with someone describing the action, and you still hear the dialogue and the music and the sound effects. So everybody thought this was the greatest idea ever, but it turns out that the audience for this technology, the blind people that were using it, really didn't like it because it was so slow. They wanted the story. And then whenever the record, the audio book, on the album would start describing the action and going into these long musical interludes and sound effects, they're like, oh, for Pete's sake, let's go. Like, what's happening in the story? They just found all the music and stuff just really annoying. And then over time, they gave their feedback. I think in the podcast, they were talking about the blind people just like smashing their phonographs because they got so frustrated and stressed out. No, that wasn't what they said. They said that they tried to make their phonographs go faster because it was going so slow. Like on a podcast, we might set it to 1.5 times speed or 2 times speed because the way the person is speaking is too slow for us, and we speed it up by hitting 1.5 or 1.25 times. And they're trying to do that with their phonographs. They're trying to adjust it to make it go faster, and they ended up breaking their phonographs because they were trying to make them go faster. And then this feedback went to the people making these things, and then they ended up with audiobooks as we have them today, that the person is speaking very quickly and very clearly and just getting through the story and not bothering with all the musical flourishes. It was, the way they describe it was they tried to make the voices, the people reading the books, as clear and distinct, not monotone, but rigorous as possible. In a way, it was like trying to take the human voice and make it as rigorous as Braille. They didn't need all the fancy curlicues, like how in the very beginning they had the lettering, and the lettering was so fancy, and it eventually turned into like simple lettering and then became just dots. And that was the most efficient. And same thing with audio. They made it less and less fancy, so now it's just a straight reading. And that was what was preferred. That worked the best because our brains are so powerful. We hear the story, we can picture everything. We can imagine everything that's going on. So we don't need all the flourishes and all the descriptions and things. We just need the story, and our brain can create the world, inside our mind. So yeah, that was very interesting too. All right, that is it. Where am I in terms of my uploading of videos? I'm not connected to the internet anymore. The Wi-Fi disconnected. I didn't notice. So I got to connect again. And who knows? I'm up to 53%. So 3% more has uploaded. Yeah, so it's not going to finish while I'm here. So I've got to get organized. I have to start packing up. And then eventually, this morning, I'm going to move to a new hotel. I thought briefly about staying here, and I just checked online. I thought, maybe I can just reserve a room here, but it turns out it's fully booked. So this room, someone has booked it out from under me, and that's always a big problem with the modern world. It's so convenient to be able to book hotel rooms online, but it has meant for people like me that possession doesn't work anymore. Like in the old days, I could just walk out to the front desk right now. It's almost 10 in the morning, but I can just go out there right now and just pay for another night and say, I want to stay here one more night or 2 more nights, no problem. But you can't do that anymore because someone on the internet booked and paid for this room for tonight. So they booked it out from under me, basically. So I have no choice. I have to move out. Anyway, so that's it for this morning. I'm going to do a shutdown and see you in the next video.